my mom was very young when she had me. She was a teenager and in her late teens. And Joni Mitchell is her favorite artist. She is from Saskatchewan herself, from Saskatoon as well. And I've had many wonderful conversations with Joni about Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. She came into the room at the premiere ceremony just as I won for Eve Was Black. And when I saw her after she won her award for Best Folk Album, she said, "Canadian girls taking over." You know, it was like she's proud of me too. So that there's something just ineffably joyful about it all to me, and incredibly resonant. And I don't know, it's like rearranged my molecules, and I'll never get over it.
Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me on this show. It's an honor.
Welcome back to Vancouver and the Commodore Ballroom.
Yes, this beautiful room.
Which you've been in the audience here, but until now,
times.
never played it.
Never played it. I've been to so many shows here. I lived in Vancouver, sort of foundational, formative years in my late teens, early adulthood, and came out of the closet as an artist here and a songwriter, and started my first band, Po Girl, here. So it's a really big deal to come back. I dreamt of one day playing the Commodore. So to start the Canadian tour, the returner tour with a sold-out show at the Commodore Ballroom in Vancouver, it's just dreamlike. It really is.
You're not just starting your tour here, but you're starting your tour as a recent Grammy winner, Best American Roots Performance.
Yes.
It doesn't roll off my tongue
No.
yet, but for people who don't really know what that means, how would you describe your music to them?
I think, broadly roots music, so definitely influenced by the folk scene, influenced by the Americana scene, alternative country, if you will, but not really. It's the music that, honestly, that we started making here in Vancouver, BC, at the turn of the century in the millennium. My first baby band, Po Girl, that was 21 years. It will be 21 years in June. Our first record came out in 2003.
She's always late for something. He's always less than presents.
Lots of different artists from Vancouver came through the band, and we were blending. It was an amalgam of a lot of different influences, from jazz to folk to rock and roll, and we were playing banjos and fiddles and clarinets in my case, because I'm a super nerd, and it was just a joyful thing. And slowly but surely, if you keep doing your same strange thing for 20 years, eventually people think it's cool. So I think that's what happened.
You haven't mind you what you lost. Do you hate or do you lust? Do you despise or do you return?
You've been critically acclaimed for a long while. There are a lot of people who treasure your music and who helped you out. But I wonder about the Grammy. What does that Grammy win mean to you?
For so long I didn't think that they were for me at all, and it was my friend Brandy Carlisle that encouraged me to engage more with the Recording Academy, because it's a peer review, essentially. And so, because what it really is all the other artists that you love and admire saying, "We appreciate the music you're making, we're acknowledging it." It's a symbolic thing, There's the discomfort of even the notion of any layer of competition with music, because it's just not. Music is about community, not competition.
Did y'all hear Sister Strings with Brandy Clark? This is as much for them and for the entire Rainbow Coalition of absolute goddesses, towering artists that I get to play with.
To have my peer group, artists that I love, and some of my heroes like Joni Mitchell, who I got to play with on the Grammys, and Annie Lennox and Wendy and Lisa, who played on our record with us, and on the song Eve Was Black, that was nominated and ultimately awarded this Best American Roots Performance Grammy. It's so uplifting, because these are the artists that have inspired me, that are foundational to my writing and my work. And so for them to say, "We hear you and we appreciate you," it means a lot. It's uplifting.
let's jump back now, even before Vancouver, and you growing up in Montreal.
Montreal.
I mean, what I've read of your childhood, it sounds like it was incredibly challenging. Your mother was very, very young.
Yeah.
You spent some time in foster care. You had an abusive stepfather.
A stepfather who became my adoptive father.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what impact did all of that have on you?
You know, I think like many children and adults who experience severe domestic violence and abuse, there was a period of my life where I did not think I was worth anything, and it was a very near thing in my early childhood whether I was going to survive that situation or not. I was lucky to be in Montreal because Montreal is a city with free public art at its heart. So I had the benefit of incredible public libraries. I had the benefit of the Jazz Fest. I had the benefit of Caravana. I had the benefit of Shakespeare in the Park and Repercussion Theater and the students at the McGill Conservatory giving free concerts. And so I was able to sustain this activism of the imagination that was fueled by my access to public art and literature and books to read of there's other ways to live. This is maybe this doesn't have to be the end of my story, right? I think nothing can change in our reality if we can't imagine it first. So I think there's a kind of an activism of the imagination that is fed and nurtured by the arts, and also empathy. That's how we grow our empathy. That's the currency of art, is empathy, and we need that desperately when we're in terrible situations, when we're working through trauma. But just in life, we need it. You know, it helps us, the humanities help us be our highest human selves, I believe. And so for me, having access not just to art, but to the artistic community that ultimately secured and saved me when I ran away from home when I was 15. I was going to an alternative high school in Montreal called Mind, Moving in New Directions. It was right across the street from McGill University in the same building as FACE, which is the fine arts school. We were like one hallway. We were kind of the extra weirdos, the little misfits hallway. But that school fostered project-based learning, it fostered student-led learning, it fostered art, and it really was this renaissance for me. And that's when for me, my situation at home was severe. The abuse was severe enough that it was a situation of run or die. And I ran when I was 15, and it was scary, and I slept in the Mount Royal Cemetery in the summertime, and I sometimes would, sleep at the Marie Reine du Monde Cathedral in the winter. But I somehow stayed safe because of my community at that school and in the arts in Montreal. And I found my way through my own pain, through writing, through songwriting, through poetry writing. And so I'm so grateful that was my experience. I'm evangelical about the importance of public art and access to art and art in schools, because I know even if the child isn't going to become a musician themselves or a painter, all humans need that outlet and that experience of processing life, of understanding that other people have been where you are and have felt what you feel. I'll never forget hearing Tracy Chapman's Behind the Wall for the first time when I was 9. It was like this revelatory, other people, we were the family behind the wall. And suddenly I knew I wasn't alone because of her song, so that art is so important to me. And that childhood, while painful, at the same time, I was incredibly privileged to be in Montreal and to have access to the art that I had access to, hearing Oscar Peterson play for free at Jazz Fest in the Park, hearing Freedom in his left hand on the Black Keys, it was extraordinary.
Inspiration can come from many different places, and so this next thing, though very Canadian, might be surprising to some people, but from what I understand, you were inspired by, and I don't know, maybe obsessed by, Kids in the Hall?
I love Kids in the Hall. I love Kids in the Hall so much.
Well, what's up with that?
Yes, so my one of my best friends in high school at this alternative high school, Mind, Allison Russell, we had a little duo, and we would, in downtown Montreal, old Montreal in the summertime, we would busk on the street these skits that were very much ripping off Kids in the Hall and Monty Python. but we thought we were hilarious. We called ourselves Sister Blackfish, and we made up little comedy songs and just busked for the tourists in the summertime.
Were you hilarious?
Well, they would give us loonies and toonies, so they thought we were cute enough to
Nice.
give us some money, I guess. But I just think they were so innovative and brilliant, and they were so brilliant at approaching difficult things with lightness, with humor. And I think that I have incorporated some of that into songwriting. I often will write about hard things with very joyful, dancey sounds, so that maybe people don't realize at first, and then they start, the songs Stay Right Here. People are like, it's a disco, it's fun. And I'm like, well, listen a little closer. It's not quite as light as that. Yeah.
Wait a sec. So Kids in the Hall is still a bit of a musical inspiration for you?
More in the way, I wouldn't say
Musical?
although the music on that show was fantastic.
Yeah.
it was fantastic.
But
and
maybe
they were,
a thematic inspiration.
Yes, and an approach to the duality and the multiplicity of human experience in any given moment, that many things can be true at the same time. It can be exalted and it can be terrible at the same time.
That may be the most poetic description of Kids in the Hall that I've ever heard. So I hope they see this and are pleased.
They inspired the activism of my imagination very deeply.
Wow.
So.
These are the best years of your life. If I'd believed it, I'd have died. Something told me that they'd lie. I survived. Left home, I was just a child. Slept in the graveyard under the mile. When the sun came up and found my skin, I rose again.
Now, a Canadian inspiration that might fit better in people's minds for you than Kids in the Hall is Joni Mitchell, who inspired you, and I can't imagine how many ways, but including to pick up the clarinet.
Clarinet, yes. So my mom was very young when she had me. She was a teenager and in her late teens. And Joni Mitchell is her favorite artist. She is from Saskatchewan herself, from Saskatoon as well. And I've had many wonderful conversations with Joni about Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And my mom just loved all of her oeuvre and would listen to her albums on repeat. And when I was in foster care, I would get, I think it was a monthly visitation with my mom, and we would meet at my grandmother's house. And my grandma had this lovely upright piano. My mom's a beautiful pianist. And one of my earliest memories, I was probably 2, maybe 3, was hiding under that piano and listening to my mom. She would play along with Joni Mitchell's records. And she was playing the album Ladies of the Canyon. And there's a deeper cut on that album called For Free. And it's about a busker. Joni is singing about a busker.
And he played real good on his clarinet for free.
At the end of it, there's this beautiful clarinet coda, and I remember being electrified hearing that sound of the clarinet for the first time. Seeing my mom's feet on the pedals and her hands on the keys, and I was kind of sitting under the piano, and it really imprinted. And so eventually I picked up the clarinet. I became a clarinetist years later. Brandi Carlile invites me to be part of the Joni Jam at Newport, and Joni just won a Grammy for that record, that album, Joni at Newport, live at Newport, and which I'm on, playing clarinet with the woman who introduced me to the clarinet in the first place.
I mean,
Yeah.
I can't
Incredible.
imagine what that's like to have somebody who inspires so many, but
Yeah.
inspired you, and then to
Yeah.
be playing with her.
It was one of the most surreal, like a fever dream. I felt like I was in a fever dream. And can this possibly be my life? But also so natural and joyful. And all of us that are part of the Joni Jam, Brandi Carlile and Sister Strings and Lucius and Blake Mills and Jacob Collier joined us on the Grammy performance. We've all been so formationally influenced by her, not just her writing, but her bravery as a person, her honesty, her activism through music. We've all been inspired by her and formed in a certain way by that. So it also just felt very natural, like we all just get along and hang out, and it feels really normal.
I looked at love from both sides now. From absolute.
And she reminds me so much of my grandma because they grew up in the same place. And my grandma was a little bit older than she, but there's this familiarity too and she loves that she came into the room at the premiere ceremony just as I won for Eve Was Black. And when I saw her after she won her award for Best Folk Album, she said, "Canadian girls taking over." It was like she's proud of me too. So that there's something just ineffably joyful about it all to me, and incredibly resonant. And I don't know, it's like rearranged my molecules, and I'll never get over it. Yeah.
Canada is clearly so important to you,
Yeah.
growing up in Montreal, coming out here,
Yeah.
the influences that we've talked about. But you live in Nashville.
I live in Nashville.
Why did
like
you choose
so many.
Nashville?
Well, I ended up in the States because of love, because I fell in love with an American, and their job required them to be in one place. And I was in Po-Girl at the time and living out of a suitcase and touring 300 days out of the year. So I had more flexibility with where I could be, which is why I ended up emigrating there. And then we ended up moving to Nashville from Chicago because of music and songwriting. We had our daughter, when we moved to Nashville, was 3 years old. We were trying to figure out, what our plan was. We were in a band together called Birds of Chicago, and we had been doing really hard touring for almost 7 years at that point, and we just realized we needed to have a few more strings in our fiddle, and we wanted to start writing for other songwriters or other artists. So yeah, Nashville has a very special songwriting lineage, and it's the town of the co-write. It's the town of you get together and let's write a song at lunch, So we moved there for that and for the community that we had there with Rhiannon Giddens and Abigail Washburn and Luther Dickinson, and just a wonderful community of artists.
Yeah, I've not been to Nashville, but it's funny from afar. If you mention Nashville to me, I think country music.
Yeah.
But when I hear you talk about it, you talk about music, about celebrating
it's broader.
music.
It's much broader. There's an incredibly diverse scene of music there that spans all genre. It's a really vibrant, wonderful place, and there's a huge Canadian expat crowd, including one of my first collaborators here in Vancouver, Steve Dawson. He lives down the road from me, who started Black Hen Records here in Vancouver.
Standing on the corner, waiting on the school bus. She said I had such bad luck. I got the bad hair and the bad skin. I just could not understand it. Demons.
I am so curious to know your answer to this, and that is how you feel about Beyonce's country single.
I'm thrilled about it. I hadn't heard any of the news about her dropping a country record, and someone shared with me Texas Hold'em the day that it came out, and the first notes on Texas Hold'em are my sister Rhiannon Giddens. It's her banjo, and it's unmistakable. Her banjo is such a unique, deep sound. It's a fretless
And you instantly
replica of an
could
1850. Instantly, I knew it was Rhiannon, and I screamed, and I fell over, and it was like, "That's Rhiannon!" And of course, from that moment, I was in, and I was thrilled that Beyonce very consciously chose to highlight and amplify the work of Black artists in roots music, in country music, in Americana, in folk. In these genres, which have been whitewashed over the years quite purposefully in the early days of the recording industry, because unfortunately of bias, bigotry, and white supremacy, but are being reclaimed, and that are foundationally and formationally also the work of the Black diaspora. So as is every form of modern music that's come from the melting pot of America, it's all of us. It's the Black diaspora, it's the indigenous. Incredible indigenous diaspora. It's of course European, and every wave of migration that's ever come to these shores is a part of the story of the music that we think of as American or North American, as I prefer to, or when I talk about America, I really mean Caribbean to Canada to Nunavut.
Yeah, I'm a midnight rider, stone bona fide. down will be you.
I'd never met you before.
Yeah.
I have to say, sitting here, I'm struck by a couple of things. One is, you're so joyful. I don't know if you've always been that way, but you sure are now.
Thank you.
And you have so much energy, and the energy is all positive. And is that because of where you are right now in your life, or is this who you've always been?
I think that has been part of, I think it's my ancestors carrying me through things, honestly, I really do. I didn't meet my biological father until I was 30 years old. He's a wonderful person, he's from Grenada, lives now in Brampton, Ontario. And when I met him, we're exactly alike. And he had a tough childhood as well in Grenada, and one of 13 kids, and went through the invasion of Grenada by Reagan's troops and in the 80s, and had to start all over again in Canada, and had to, all these things. But he has this joyfulness and laughter about things. And when I met him, it was like, oh, well, apparently, I'm carrying on a lineage here, But I also think there is something we don't talk about enough, and it's survivor's joy. That when you have been ground down as low as you can be ground down, and you survive it, and you come out the other side, and you find your chosen family who sees you and loves you for who you are. And for anyone listening that needs to hear this, you will find your chosen family if you hang in there. If you not all, we don't choose who we're born to, who we're fostered by, who we're stolen by, who we're adopted by. We don't get to choose those things, but at a certain point we start to get to choose who our family is. And they're the ones that see us and love us exactly as we are, and we do that for them. And I think having that now, being part of a circle, a loving circle that sees and accepts me and loves me as I am, is endlessly joyful to me, and I will never take it for granted because I know what it was like to live without that.
I thought this was going to be an interview about music.
Yeah.
It's about life lessons, and I could listen to you for a long, long time. It's been a real privilege talking to you.
It is such a privilege talking to you and an honor to be on the show. Yeah. Thank you.